Get him out, now. He doesn't belong here.
They threw the maintenance tech out of the charity gala like he was trash. The donor chairwoman pointed at his work boots, and security paraded him past tuxedos and camera flashes. The single dad didn't argue. He simply steadied his daughter's hand and walked. But minutes later, when the ballroom turned dangerous, the same crowd would beg him to return. Because this isn't about being rejected. It's about who gets overlooked until it's too late. By the way, where are you watching from? Tell me in the comments below. The guards expected resistance. That was the part they were trained for. Raised voices. Excuses. Maybe a shove. What they didn't expect was the way the man adjusted his grip on the little girl's hand, nodded once, and stepped forward without a single word. No protest, and no embarrassment leaking out. Just quiet compliance, like this wasn't the first time he'd been dismissed by someone with a badge and borrowed authority. He walked with the steadiness of someone who knew exactly where every exit led. The polished marble under his boots reflected chandeliers worth more than his car, and still, his pace never changed, not rushed, not slowed. The girl looked up at him once, eyes wide, reading his face for cues. He squeezed her fingers gently, a signal she'd learned well. "I've got you. Keep moving." Behind them, the ballroom breathed money. Crystal glasses chimed. A string quartet recovered its rhythm. Laughter rolled back into place as if nothing awkward had happened at all. That was the real cruelty of it. The way power erased people and kept celebrating. Outside the main doors, the sound changed. Music dulled into a muffled thrum. The air cooled. The man exhaled slowly, the kind of breath that came from habit, not emotion. He crouched slightly so he was level with the girl. "It's okay," he said, voice low and even. "We're not in trouble." She nodded, though her mouth trembled. They were staring. "I know." He brushed a stray curl from her face. Staring doesn't get to decide who we are. The guards lingered, watching for a moment, then turned back inside. Their job was done. Problem removed. He stood there in the service drive, fluorescent lights humming overhead, listening. Years of instinct cataloged the sounds without effort. The vibration through the concrete. The faint metallic groan somewhere deep in the building. He tilted his head, just a fraction, as if the night air had whispered something only he could hear. Inside, the gala pushed harder. More bodies, more movement, more weight added to something already strained. He didn't look back. Not yet. The girl tugged his sleeve. "Are we going home?" "Soon," he said. "I just need to make a call." He reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. The screen cracked from a fall months ago. No signal down here. He stepped closer to the edge of the drive, where the concrete sloped toward the loading dock. The smell of oil and damp stone grounded him. Familiar territory. Places like this made sense. They followed rules. As he waited for a bar of service to flicker alive, a ripple of sound rolled through the building behind him. Not applause, not music. Something sharper. A collective intake of breath. Then another sound, unmistakable once you knew it. Stress. Materials complaining under pressure. His thumb froze over the screen. Inside the ballroom, the donor chairwoman was smiling again, lifting her glass, already telling herself she'd handled the disruption decisively. Image protected. Evening saved. She didn't hear the low warning creak beneath the stage decor, drowned out by polite laughter and clinking crystal. Out here, in the place meant for labor and shadows, the man closed his eyes for half a second. He saw load charts without trying. Saw rushed approvals. Temporary installations pushed past safe limits because spectacle always came first. He opened his eyes and looked at the service entrance door, the one security had just escorted him through. The girl followed his gaze. "Dad," he knelt, meeting her eyes again, calm as ever. "I need you to stay right here," he said gently. "Don't move unless I tell you." "Can you do that for me?" She swallowed, then nodded. Brave. Always brave. He straightened and took one step toward the door he'd been thrown out of. Just one. The ground vibrated again, stronger this time. A scream cut through the music inside. The Gala hadn't even realized yet what it had broken. The scream inside sharpened into chaos, and the vibration under his boots deepened like a warning growl. He didn't hesitate. The service door was still ajar from his removal, the magnetic lock delayed by the same aging wiring he'd flagged weeks ago. He slipped through before anyone thought to stop him, moving fast but controlled, senses widening as the muffled elegance collapsed into raw noise. Inside, people clustered near the stage, confused, dresses brushing cables, shoes skidding on polished floors not meant for sudden movement. The decorative arch above the platform had shifted, subtle but lethal, its weight no longer where it was designed to be. He scanned angles, joints, load points, doing the math in his head while his body threaded through gaps no one else noticed. Someone shouted for security. Someone else called for a medic. Neither knew where to start. The donor chairwoman stood frozen near the front row, smile gone, glass forgotten in her hand. Her authority, so sharp minutes earlier, dulled into panic as aides spoke over one another. She raised her voice, trying to restore order, but sound doesn't equal control when gravity decides otherwise. The arch creaked again, louder this time, and the crowd recoiled. He lifted his hand, palm out, not loud, just clear. "Stop moving," he said, voice cutting through the noise without force. A few people heard him. Fewer listened. That was fine. He adjusted his path, reaching the side of the stage where access panels hid the ugly truth beneath the decor. A stagehand stared at him, eyes wild. "You can't be here," the man said, half-hearted. He didn't slow. "If that joint shears, it's coming down," he replied, already crouching. The words weren't dramatic, they were factual. The stagehand swallowed and stepped aside. Another scream, this one closer, thinner, a child's voice. He turned, heart tightening, and saw the small figure near the edge of the crowd, pale, crumpling as adults stumbled around him. The boy's knees buckled, and someone caught him too late. He hit the floor hard, a gasp rattling out of him. "Move," he said, sharper now. People parted, instinctively obeying the tone they hadn't recognized before. He knelt beside the boy, their fingers already checking pulse, airway, skin temperature. Too hot, too fast. Stress, crowding, underlying condition made worse by panic. He looked up. "I need space," he said, "now." This time, they listened. The donor chairwoman stepped forward, eyes flicking between the arch and the child. "Where is medical?" she demanded, voice cracking. "Stuck at the elevators," someone answered. "They won't open." He shifted his weight, mind splitting tasks cleanly. "You," he said to a nearby server, "get ice and water, not cold shock, just cool." To another, "Call for a stretcher and tell them to use the service stairs." He didn't wait for confirmation. The arch groaned again, a sound that made the air feel heavier. He glanced back, calculating seconds. Not many. From the edge of the room, a familiar small face watched him, eyes huge but steady. If she hadn't moved, good. He caught her gaze for a heartbeat and gave a tiny nod. "Stay." He turned back to the problem at hand, shrugging off his jacket and rolling up his sleeves. Years fell into place without nostalgia. This was just work. Necessary, precise. He stabilized the boy's head, spoke quietly to keep him conscious, monitored breathing while listening for the building's complaints above them. "Who are you?" the donor chairwoman asked, standing too close, fear edging into suspicion. He didn't look up. "The person you escorted out," he said. Not accusation, just fact. Another vibration shuddered through the floor, stronger, drawing a collective gasp from the crowd. He shifted position, shielding the boy with his body as he called out instructions to the stagehand again, pointing to a rigging point that could buy them time. Someone filmed, someone prayed, someone finally shut up. If this is hitting you already, go ahead and subscribe so you don't miss what happens next. This isn't just a Gala story. The donor chairwoman's face drained of color as she realized the truth unfolding in front of everyone. Power hadn't solved anything. Titles hadn't. The man in work boots had. The arch held just barely, as the first responder finally broke through the crowd. He transferred care smoothly, concise, efficient, earning a stunned nod. As the stretcher rolled away, the room exhaled, relief mixing with shame. He stood, flexing his fingers once, eyes already back on the structure overhead. The crisis wasn't over. Not yet. The stretcher disappeared through the side exit, and with it went the brief illusion that the danger had passed. The crowd didn't scatter this time. They hovered, uncertain, caught between fear and curiosity, eyes drawn back to the man who had moved through the chaos like he belonged there more than anyone else in the room. The donor chairwoman straightened her shoulders, reflexively reaching for control again. "Everyone needs to stay calm," she said, voice louder than necessary. "Security, clear this area. We don't need movement right now makes it worse," he cut in, not raising his voice, just placing it precisely where it needed to land. A few heads snapped toward him. Others followed. The words weren't a challenge, they were a correction. She stared at him, clearly unused to being interrupted, especially by someone she'd dismissed minutes earlier. "Excuse me." He finally looked at her, really looked. Not with anger, with assessment. The load's uneven. If people rush, the vibration could finish what gravity started. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Someone glanced up at the arch, as if seeing it clearly for the first time. The donor chairwoman's lips parted, then pressed together. She gestured sharply to her head of security. "Do what he says," she snapped, as if the order had always been hers. Security complied, though their movements lacked confidence now. They weren't escorting anyone anymore. They were following. He stepped toward the side of the stage again, eyes tracking the micro-shifts most people couldn't feel. His mind stayed calm, almost cold, but his chest tightened when he caught sight of the small figure near the service entrance. Still there, still watching. He gave another subtle signal with his hand. "Stay back." Behind him, Elena Royce pushed through the thinning crowd, her heels abandoned somewhere along the way. Her face was flushed, hair pulled loose from its careful style. "I'm the charity director," she said quickly. "Tell me what you need." That, at least, was a useful question. "Access to the maintenance cage," he replied. "And someone who can shut off the decorative hydraulics feeding the stage." Her eyes widened. "Those were approved last minute by—" She stopped herself, following his gaze back to the donor chairwoman. "Then they were approved without proper recalculation," he said. Again, no accusation, just reality. "We can stabilize, but we need to do it now." Elena nodded once and turned, already issuing instructions, her authority suddenly aligning with competence instead of optics. The donor chairwoman watched this exchange with a tight expression. Aware, the room was no longer moving to her rhythm. The arch creaked again, a sharp metallic protest that made several guests gasp and stumble backward. Someone knocked over a chair. Another phone clattered to the floor. He moved instinctively, bracing a support point, body-absorbing vibration as if he'd done this 100 times before. Because he had. "You should step away," the donor chairwoman said, a brittle edge in her voice. If something happens, he interrupted. "It happens whether I'm here or not. The difference is whether anyone knows what to do." Silence followed. Heavy, uncomfortable, public. She searched for a response that wouldn't weaken her further and found none. Around them, donors and guests watched openly now, no longer pretending this was just an unfortunate hiccup. The hierarchy had cracked, and everyone could see it. From the maintenance cage, a staff member returned with equipment, hands shaking. He took the tools without ceremony, checking each one, adjusting settings, already planning the sequence in his head. He spoke as he worked, not to impress, but to coordinate. The stagehand nodded along, absorbing instructions like lifelines. Elena hovered nearby, eyes darting between the structure and the child's empty space on the floor. "He's stable," she said quietly. "The medics got him out." He allowed himself one slow breath at that. Good. Another vibration rolled through the floor, weaker this time. The adjustments were helping. He signaled for weight redistribution, directing staff to move equipment rather than people. The arch responded, settling by degrees. The donor chairwoman's phone buzzed in her hand. She ignored it. For once, the outside world could wait. She looked at him again, really seeing him now, and the question slipped out before she could stop herself. "Where did you learn to do this?" He tightened a bolt, muscles burning pleasantly with purpose. "On jobs where mistakes didn't get a second chance," he said. The answer wasn't enough, and everyone knew it. Whispers began, speculation threading through the room. Someone mentioned a name. Someone else mentioned a past headline, half remembered. The truth pressed closer, ready to surface. He finished the adjustment and stepped back, scanning the structure, listening. The arch held, solid, safe for now. The crowd released a collective breath, relief washing over fear, but something else lingered beneath it. Respect, curiosity, and the sharp awareness that they'd misjudged the wrong person. He wiped his hands on his pants and turned toward the service entrance again, eyes finding his daughter. She smiled, small and proud, and in that moment the humiliation from earlier finally loosened its grip. The Gala would survive the night. Its image, though, had already changed. The structure settled into a fragile stillness, and the room slowly remembered how to breathe. Applause tried to start somewhere, awkward and uncertain, then died when no one joined in. This wasn't a performance. Everyone felt that now. It was survival, narrowly negotiated, and the aftertaste left people subdued. He stepped back into the shadowed edge of the stage, eyes never fully leaving the arch. Stabilized didn't mean solved. It meant time had been purchased, nothing more. Around him, our staff waited for the next instruction, no longer questioning why they should listen. Authority had quietly shifted without anyone announcing it. The donor chairwoman cleared her throat, smoothing her jacket as if the fabric could restore what had cracked. "We'll resume once everything is cleared," she said, projecting calm that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Our guests don't need unnecessary alarm." Elena turned to her, disbelief flashing before professionalism took over. "With respect," she said carefully, "we need a full safety assessment before anything resumes." The donor chairwoman bristled. "This event is critical. Cameras are still rolling, pulling the plug now. Could have cost a child his life," Elena finished, voice tight. The words landed hard, impossible to spin. The donor chairwoman's jaw clenched. She looked toward him again, measuring, calculating. "You," she said, tone sharpened by pride, "you've done enough. Security will escort you back to the service area. We'll take it from here." The order echoed the earlier dismissal, dressed up as gratitude. A few heads turned his way, watching to see if he'd be erased again now that the immediate danger had passed. He didn't react right away. He listened, the faint hum in the rigging, the uneven tension still whispering through metal. "You can't," he said finally. Her eyes flashed. "Excuse me?" "You don't have the right people," he replied, "and you don't have the margin, not yet." Murmurs rippled again. Someone near the back whispered, "He's right," without realizing they'd said it aloud. The donor chairwoman took a step closer, lowering her voice. "This is my event." He met her gaze, steady. "And this is a bad failure mode." For a split second, anger threatened to win. Then another subtle groan crept through the arch, softer than before but unmistakable. Several guests flinched. The building itself weighed in. Elena didn't hesitate. "We follow his assessment," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. "All of it." The donor chairwoman looked around and realized something vital had shifted. The room was no longer with her. Not against her exactly, but no longer obedient. She nodded stiffly. "Fine," she said, but quickly. He moved again, directing controlled unloading of decorative elements, prioritizing stability over aesthetics. Staff stripped away expensive ornamentation piece by piece, each removal a quiet metaphor no one missed. The Gala's grandeur peeled back to exposed framework and practical supports. From the service entrance his daughter watched, legs drawn up beneath her, absorbing everything. Fear lingered in her eyes, but it was threaded with trust. She'd seen this version of him before, in smaller ways. Fixing broken heaters, talking down panicked neighbors, doing what needed doing without asking for permission. A security guard approached her, softer now. "You okay, kid?" She nodded. "That's my dad," she said simply. The guard followed her gaze, something shifting behind his eyes. "Yeah," he murmured, "I can see that." Back near the stage, the donor chairwoman fielded a call she could no longer ignore. Her voice dropped, urgent, defensive. The crisis was already leaking beyond the ballroom, and control was slipping through channels money usually commanded with ease. He tightened the final temporary brace and stepped back, scanning, listening, feeling the structure settle into something closer to honest stability. It wasn't pretty, it wasn't impressive, but it was safe. "For tonight," he said to Elena, "this holds." She let out a breath she'd been holding far too long. "Thank you," she said, and this time the words carried weight. The donor chairwoman ended her call and looked at him, expression unreadable. "We'll need a report," she said. "Credentials, background." He wiped his hands again, the grease grounding him. "You'll get what you need." "And after that?" she pressed. He glanced toward the service entrance where his daughter sat patiently, trusting him to come back. "After that," he said, "I go home." The simplicity of it landed harder than any confrontation. Around them, the crowd began to disperse under controlled guidance, high whispers trailing like smoke. Speculation grew, names floated, connections formed. Pieces of a past most of them had never imagined began aligning. As the ballroom emptied, the donor chairwoman remained, staring at the stripped-down stage. The event would continue, salvaged, but its center had shifted. The power she wielded felt thinner now, more conditional. He walked toward his daughter, each step lighter than the last. The night wasn't over. The truth hadn't fully surfaced, but something irreversible had begun, and everyone felt it, whether they admitted it or not. He reached the service entrance just as the last guests were guided away from the immediate area. The noise softened into a distant murmur, but the building still spoke if you knew how to listen. He crouched beside his daughter, checking her face, her hands, and the way her shoulders rose and fell. Only when he was sure she was steady did the tension ease in his spine. "You did good," he said quietly. She nodded, then hesitated. "Are they mad at you?" He almost smiled. "They're confused." Before she could ask more, hurried footsteps echoed down the corridor. Elena appeared first, breathless, followed closely by 2 senior facility managers and, a few paces behind, the donor chairwoman. The contrast was sharp. One looked relieved to have found him. The other looked like she was approaching a problem she hadn't been able to buy her way out of. "We need you back inside," Elena said, skipping pretense. "There's more." He rose slowly. "The structure's holding. For now," one of the managers added, "but the load readings aren't normal. Something's still off." The donor chairwoman crossed her arms. "This doesn't mean we're handing over the entire event," she said, voice clipped. "I've already had 3 calls asking why the program paused." He looked at her, then at the manager. "Show me the readings." The manager hesitated, glancing at the donor chairwoman, then handed over the tablet. He studied it, brow furrowing, thumb scrolling with practiced ease. The numbers told a clear story. Not just the arch. The floor beneath the stage. A cascading stress pattern caused by rushed reinforcement and decorative hydraulics layered without recalculation. "This wasn't designed to fail all at once," he said. "It's designed to fail in stages, quietly." Elena went pale. "Meaning?" "Meaning, if we restart without correcting this," he said, "the next failure won't announce itself. It'll just happen." The donor chairwoman scoffed, though her eyes betrayed her. "You're exaggerating." He handed the tablet back. "I'm being conservative." Silence stretched. Somewhere above them, metal pinged softly as it cooled. He turned to his daughter. "I need you to stay with Elena for a bit." She looked between them, then nodded, trusting him without question. Elena knelt to her level, offering a reassuring smile that didn't quite mask her own fear. As he followed the managers back inside, the donor chairwoman fell into step beside him. "You're enjoying this," she said under her breath. "The attention." He stopped walking. She nearly collided with him. "No," he said evenly. "I'm preventing injuries. Don't confuse the two." People were gathering again near the stage, phones out, whispers louder now. The earlier spectacle had primed them. They sensed something more was coming. He took position near the exposed framework, directing staff to isolate sections of the floor, redistribute weight, and shut down the hydraulics completely. Decorative panels were removed entirely, stacked unceremoniously against the wall. "That cost 6 figures, someone muttered. "It's not worth a life," he replied, not turning. The donor chairwoman's phone buzzed again. She glanced at it, jaw tightening, then ignored it. "If this goes wrong," she said, "the fallout will be enormous." He met her gaze. "If this goes wrong, people get hurt. Everything else is noise." A sudden tremor rippled through the floor, stronger than before. Gasps rose as a hairline crack appeared near the stage edge, sharp and unmistakable. The room froze. "Everyone back," he said, loud now, slowly. The crowd obeyed instantly. He moved fast, coordinating with the managers, using temporary supports and emergency bracing stored in the maintenance cage. His hands worked from muscle memory, his mind locked into problem-solving mode that had once kept teams alive in worse conditions than this. Sweat beaded at his temples, but his movements stayed precise. The crack stopped spreading. A collective breath released, shaky and disbelieving. Someone whispered, "Who is he?" Another voice answered, I think I've heard his name before. If you're still with me, hit subscribe now. You don't want to miss what this turns into. Elena returned with his daughter, keeping her at a safe distance. The girl watched, eyes shining with a mix of fear and awe. He caught her gaze and gave a small nod. Almost done, the donor chairwoman stared at the stabilized floor, then at him. Something in her posture shifted, subtle but real. Pride didn't vanish, but it bent under the weight of undeniable reality. "Where did you learn this level of structural response?" she asked, voice lower, stripped of its earlier sharpness. He secured the last brace and straightened. "On deployments where buildings didn't forgive mistakes." The answer rippled through the room, connecting dots no one had fully seen before. Murmurs grew louder, speculation sharpening into recognition. A facility manager stared at him, eyes widening. "You're him," the manager said softly. "From the overseas collapse response, the one who—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. The donor chairwoman went very still. The gala hadn't just been interrupted. Its narrative was unraveling, thread by thread, in full view of everyone who mattered. The room shifted in a way that had nothing to do with physics this time. Recognition moved faster than fear, spreading in hushed fragments, in half-remembered articles and late-night documentaries people hadn't realized they'd stored away. The facility manager's unfinished sentence hung in the air like a flare. "You're him." The donor chairwoman's gaze sharpened, no longer dismissive, no longer confused, calculating. She searched his face again, this time not for weakness but for confirmation. "Explain," she said, though it sounded less like a command now and more like a demand for clarity she hadn't earned. He didn't rush to answer. He scanned the floor one last time, listening, feeling for any remaining instability. Only when he was satisfied did he straighten fully, shoulders rolling back as if a weight he'd been carrying quietly was finally being set down. "There was a series of infrastructure failures overseas," the manager continued, finding his voice as memory locked into place. "Earthquake zones, collapses that weren't supposed to be survivable. You led the structural response teams." A murmur rose, sharper now. Phones came up again, not for spectacle this time, but for confirmation. Search results populated. Old headlines resurfaced. A name tied to impossible recoveries, to disaster zones where order had been pulled out of chaos by sheer discipline and engineering precision. The donor chairwoman's lips parted. "That's not possible," she said. You're on maintenance staff." He met her eyes. People changed jobs. The simplicity of it landed hard. Elena exhaled slowly, her hand flying to her mouth. "You never said—" "I wasn't asked," he replied, not bitter, just honest. The crowd pressed closer, drawn by gravity of a different kind. This wasn't gossip anymore. This was a reckoning unfolding in real time. The earlier humiliation replayed in their minds with new context, and discomfort settled in its wake. The donor chairwoman straightened, reflexively trying to reclaim ground. "Why are you here?" she asked. "Why would someone with your background be doing this work?" He glanced toward his daughter, still standing with Elena at a safe distance. She felt his eyes and smiled, small but steady. "Because it keeps food on the table," he said, "and because it lets me be home when my kid gets out of school." That answer cut deeper than any credential ever could. The room went quiet again, not stunned this time, but thoughtful. Titles lost their shine when measured against that kind of clarity. The donor chairwoman swallowed, the movement visible. Another low groan echoed through the building, faint but insistent. He reacted instantly, turning back to the structure. "We're not done," he said. "The primary failure's contained, but the secondary stress points need reinforcement before anyone even thinks about restarting." Elena nodded immediately. "Do whatever you need." The donor chairwoman hesitated, then nodded as well. It wasn't graceful, it wasn't generous, but it was real. "You have full authority," she said stiffly, "for tonight." He didn't acknowledge the concession. He moved, directing staff with crisp efficiency, assigning roles, using people based on capability rather than status. The work accelerated under his command, smoother now that resistance had fallen away. As temporary supports locked into place and stress readings normalized, the building finally fell silent. Not the tense silence of fear, but the solid quiet of something that had been set right. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, and only then did he let himself feel the ache in his muscles. The crisis had passed. The truth, however, was still unfolding. The donor chairwoman approached him again, slower this time, every step measured. "I owe you an apology," she said, the words clearly foreign on her tongue. "For earlier." He considered her, weighing the sincerity against the timing. "What happens next matters more," he said. She nodded, accepting the deflection for what it was. "The board will want a full account, and the press." "They can have the facts," he replied. "Nothing more." Elena joined them, her voice softer. "The child, Jonah, he's stable. His parents asked who helped him." His chest tightened just slightly. "Tell them I'm glad he's okay." "I think they'd want to thank you," she said. "Maybe later." The donor chairwoman watched this exchange, something shifting again behind her eyes. The gala, the donors, the optics. All of it suddenly seemed smaller, less certain, as if the ground beneath her authority had subtly tilted. Around them, guests whispered openly now, no longer hiding curiosity. Respect replaced mockery. Awe edged out dismissal. The story had already escaped the room. He turned back toward the service entrance where his daughter waited patiently. When he reached her, she looked up, eyes bright. "You fixed it," she said. "We fixed it," he corrected gently. She smiled wider. And behind them, the donor chairwoman stood amid stripped decor and exposed framework, staring at the consequences of her certainty. The gala would continue in some form, but it would never feel the same. And neither would she. She watched him walk away, the crowd unconsciously parting to let him pass, and something unfamiliar settled in her chest. It wasn't guilt exactly, it was disorientation, the kind that came when a rule you'd built your world on cracked without warning. The gala staff continued dismantling what remained of the decorative elements, the room now stripped down to function and safety. The donors lingered in clusters, no longer interested in champagne or speeches, but in the quiet man in work boots who had just rewritten the evening. Phones stayed raised, though fewer people pretended it was for the decor now, and the story had changed, and everyone sensed it. He reached the service corridor where his daughter stood with Elena. The girl rushed forward and wrapped her arms around his waist, holding on a second longer than usual. He rested his hand on her back, grounding them both. "You okay?" he asked. She nodded. "They're talking about you." He glanced back toward the ballroom. "They always do," he said softly, "just not usually for the right reasons." Elena knelt beside them, relief etched deep into her face. "The building inspectors are on their way," she said. "They're going to want to hear everything from you." He sighed, not with annoyance, but with the weight of inevitability. "I'll tell them what they need to know." From the ballroom entrance, the donor chairwoman approached again, slower this time, no entourage shielding her, and the crowd watched openly as she crossed the distance, every step tracked, every expression noted. Authority didn't vanish when challenged, but it did change shape. "We need to talk," she said. He nodded once. "We do." She gestured toward a quieter side room, once reserved for VIPs, now conspicuously empty. The irony wasn't lost on anyone watching. He hesitated only long enough to make sure his daughter was settled with Elena, then followed. Inside, the room felt smaller than it should have, walls closing in on conversations that could no longer hide behind spectacle. She turned to face him, arms folding again, a habit she hadn't yet broken. "I misjudged you," she said, the words clipped, practiced. "That won't happen again." "That's not the issue," he replied evenly. Her brow furrowed. "Then what is?" "You didn't misjudge me," he said. "You didn't judge at all, you decided." The distinction landed harder than an insult. She opened her mouth, then closed it, recalibrating. "I was protecting the event," she said finally, "its image." "And nearly destroyed its purpose," he replied. "There's a difference." Silence stretched between them. Outside the room, voices hummed, the night still alive, still watching. She exhaled sharply. "You could have said who you were." He met her gaze without flinching. "And it would have mattered?" Before the floor cracked? Her shoulders dropped, just slightly. The answer was there, whether she liked it or not. "No," she admitted. He nodded. "That's the problem." A knock interrupted them. A security officer leaned in, eyes darting between them. "Inspectors are here," he said. "And the press is asking questions." Her jaw tightened. Of course they are." She looked back at him, something like calculation returning, but altered now by caution. "They'll want a statement, something clean, controlled." "They'll get the truth," he said. "That can be managed," she countered. He shook his head. "Not this time." Another pause. She studied him, really studied him, and seemed to realize leverage wasn't where she thought it was. Not anymore. The room, the building, the night itself had already chosen its center of gravity. "Fine," she said quietly. "We do it your way." They stepped back into the corridor together, an unlikely pairing that drew every eye. The inspectors approached immediately, professionalism cutting through curiosity. He walked them through the failure points, the rushed approvals, the cosmetic choices that had masked real risk. He didn't dramatize. He didn't soften. He spoke in facts and consequences. The donor chairwoman stood beside him, listening as decisions made in boardrooms echoed back as stress fractures and near tragedy. Each explanation peeled another layer from the evening's polished surface. Nearby, his daughter watched, absorbing something deeper than the crisis itself. She saw how calm didn't mean weak, how quiet didn't mean invisible, how being right didn't require shouting. When the inspectors finished, one of them shook his hand firmly. "You prevented a disaster," the man said. "We'll need you for the full report." He nodded. "I'll be available." The donor chairwoman cleared her throat. "So will we," she added, voice measured. It wasn't an offer, it was an obligation now. As the inspectors moved on, the press edged closer, microphones hovering like curious birds. She glanced at him, hesitation flickering. "Together," she said. "Or, you should answer for your decisions," he replied calmly. "I'll answer for my work." It wasn't punishment, it was alignment, and she knew it. She stepped forward alone, the crowd shifting to accommodate her, while he moved back toward his daughter. Cameras followed both, splitting attention, unsure which story mattered more. He knelt beside the girl again, squeezing her hand. Almost done, he murmured. She smiled up at him, eyes bright. I know. Behind them, the donor chairwoman faced the questions she could no longer deflect. The Gala's image would survive, barely. But something else had been exposed, something harder to repair, and the people watching would remember who fixed what mattered. The microphones clustered around the donor chairwoman, their foam tips nearly touching as questions overlapped and sharpened. She answered carefully, choosing language that acknowledged the interruption without fully surrendering control. Behind her, the exposed framework loomed, a visual contradiction no statement could erase. The crowd listened, but their attention drifted, drawn repeatedly toward the service corridor where the real work had happened. He stayed back with his daughter, hands resting lightly on her shoulders. The adrenaline ebbed, leaving behind a familiar exhaustion that settled into his bones. Not weakness, just the body tallying what it had carried. He watched inspectors confer, watched staff follow new instructions without being asked twice. The building felt calmer now, as if it recognized competence and responded in kind. Elena joined them, lowering her voice. They're asking if we can safely continue with the reduced program, she said. No stage load, no hydraulics, minimal occupancy. He considered it, eyes flicking toward the reading still displayed on a nearby monitor. It's possible, he said, but only if we treat it like what it is now, a work site, not a show. She smiled faintly. I'll take that as a yes with conditions. He nodded. Strict ones. From across the room, the donor chairwoman finished her statement and stepped away from the microphones, face composed but pale. She approached slowly, aware of the watching eyes, aware that every move now carried weight. We'll proceed under your guidelines, she said, if you're willing to stay. He didn't answer immediately. He looked down at his daughter, who met his gaze with quiet certainty. It's okay, she said softly. I can sit with Elena. He crouched to her level. You sure? She nodded. You're good at this. The simplicity of it nearly undid him. He stood and turned back to the donor chairwoman. I'll stay until it's stable for the night, he said. After that, it's your responsibility to fix what caused this. She inclined her head. Not gratitude, acceptance. They moved back toward the center of the room, now rearranged into something closer to functional space than spectacle. Staff followed his directions, removing remaining stressors, rerouting foot traffic, enforcing limits no one would have tolerated earlier. Now, no one argued. The memory of the crack in the floor was still too fresh. As he worked, whispers followed him, softer now, threaded with respect. A donor murmured to another about having read something years ago. A reporter typed furiously, connecting dots. The narrative had shifted from embarrassment to exposure, and it wasn't going back. If you're still watching this unfold, go ahead and subscribe now. What comes next is where everything changes. He checked the final readings and allowed himself a slow breath. This configuration holds, he said. But it's temporary. You'll need a full structural review before hosting anything like this again. Elena nodded emphatically. That will happen. The donor chairwoman listened, arms at her sides no longer crossed defensively. We'll commission it immediately, she said. No shortcuts. He met her eyes. Good. The reduced program resumed quietly. No speeches, no grand gestures, just subdued conversations and careful movement. The gala continued, but it felt transformed, stripped of pretense. Guests spoke in lower tones, glancing often at the exposed framework, reminded of what had nearly happened. He stayed near the periphery, monitoring, adjusting when needed, a constant presence rather than a spectacle. Several people approached him with tentative thanks. He accepted them politely, without ceremony, redirecting attention back to the work whenever possible. Later, as the crowd thinned, the donor chairwoman approached again, this time alone. "You could have leveraged this," she said quietly. "Publicly, personally." He shrugged. "I leveraged it where it mattered." She studied him, something like respect finally settling in. "You didn't have to come back," she said. "Yes," he replied, "I did." She nodded, understanding that the reason had nothing to do with her. Near the service corridor, his daughter sat with Elena, drawing quietly on a folded program. She looked up when she saw him and smiled, the tension of the night finally loosening from her small frame. "It's almost over," he said, kneeling beside her. "I know," she replied. "You fixed it again." He smiled, tired but steady. "We made it safer." Behind them, the gala wound down, its meaning subtly rewritten. The crowd would leave with stories, with lessons they hadn't expected to learn. The donor chairwoman watched it all with a new awareness, the cost of certainty etched clearly now. As the last guests departed, the building settled fully, no longer protesting, no longer strained. He stood in the quiet that followed. Tools in hand, daughter at his side, dignity restored not through applause, but through undeniable truth. The night hadn't crowned a hero. It had simply revealed one. The reduced program wound down without ceremony, the kind of ending no gala planner ever imagined, but everyone now accepted. Guests drifted toward the exits in smaller groups, their conversations quieter, more reflective. The exposed framework overhead followed them like a final reminder, an unignorable scar left intentionally uncovered. He remained near the stage perimeter, watching the reading settle into consistent stability. Numbers told the truth long before people did. When they finally held steady, he allowed himself to relax his shoulders for the first time in hours. The crisis had been contained. What remained was consequence. Elena approached with a tablet tucked under her arm. "Inspectors signed off on the temporary measures," she said. "They'll issue formal notices tomorrow." "Good," he replied. That forces real fixes." She nodded, then hesitated. "The board's already asking questions about approvals, about oversight." He glanced toward the donor chairwoman who stood near the front of the ballroom, speaking quietly with two executives. Her posture was composed, but something had shifted permanently. Power still wrapped around her like a tailored jacket, but it no longer fit quite the same way. "They should ask," he said, "and they should listen." Elena smiled faintly. "I wish they always did." Across the room, the donor chairwoman ended her conversation and walked toward him once more. This time, there were no cameras, no staff hovering nearby, just two people standing in the aftermath of a near disaster. "The board wants a private meeting," she said. "They want you there." He considered it. "Tonight?" "As soon as possible," she replied. "They need to hear what almost happened, from someone who isn't invested in protecting appearances." He nodded slowly. "I'll answer questions, that's it." "That's more than fair," she said, then paused. "You realize this could change things. For you." He looked toward the service corridor where his daughter waited with Elena's assistant, humming softly as she colored. "Things already changed," he said. The donor chairwoman followed his gaze, then looked back at him. "You were invisible," she said quietly, "until you weren't." "That wasn't an accident," he replied. The truth of it lingered between them. She straightened, something resolute settling in her expression. "We'll make this right," she said. "Publicly." He studied her for a moment, then nodded. "That's your responsibility." As the staff began final cleanup, a few donors approached him one by one. Their gratitude felt sincere, if awkward, stripped of the performative ease they'd worn earlier. He accepted their thanks with a nod, redirecting praise toward the team, the inspectors, the people who followed instructions when it mattered. One man lingered longer than the rest. "My nephew was at one of those overseas collapses," he said quietly. "You led that response." He met the man's eyes. "A lot of people did." "But you were in charge," the man pressed. He shrugged. "We all carried weight." The man nodded slowly, understanding more than he said. "Thank you," he repeated, then walked away. When the ballroom finally emptied, the silence felt earned. He gathered his tools, each familiar weight a comfort in his hands. As he turned toward the service corridor, his daughter ran to him, arms wrapping tight around his middle. "Is it over?" she asked. "For tonight," he said. She leaned back to look up at him. "You didn't let them be mean." He smiled softly. "No, I didn't." They walked toward the exit together, passing under lights that were already dimming. Behind them, the donor chairwoman stood alone near the stage, staring at the stripped-down structure, phone pressed to her ear as she spoke to the board. Her voice was calm, measured, carrying accountability instead of excuses. Outside, cool night air greeted them. He inhaled deeply, the tension finally releasing. Tomorrow would bring meetings, reports, headlines, but right now, there was just this moment, the quiet after impact. As they reached the car, his phone buzzed with a new message. A request for his availability, another for an interview. He silenced them both. Tonight he'd done his job, and in doing so he'd forced a room full of power to look where it never had before. The gala was over. The reckoning was just beginning. Morning light filtered through the high windows of the boardroom, cooler and far less forgiving than the glow of chandeliers from the night before. The table was long, polished, built to impress. He took a seat at the far end, posture relaxed, hands folded loosely, as if this were just another briefing. In a way, it was. Only the stakes were different. The donor chairwoman sat opposite him, flanked by board members whose expressions ranged from defensive to quietly alarmed. Coffee went untouched. Tablets lay flat, screens dark, as though no one wanted to hide behind data just yet. The night's events hung in the air, undeniable and heavy. He began where the facts began. No dramatics, no blame-laced language, just sequence and cause. Rushed approvals, decorative load increases, ignored safety margins. He explained how spectacle had slowly replaced scrutiny, how each small decision had stacked pressure until the system nearly failed. The room listened, really listened, because the consequences had already been felt. One board member cleared his throat. "You're saying this wasn't a freak incident?" He shook his head. It was predictable. That word landed hard. Another leaned forward. "And if he hadn't been there?" The question wasn't really for him. The donor chairwoman answered before he could. "We would be discussing injuries or worse." Silence followed. Not shocked silence. Accepting silence. He continued, outlining what needed to happen next. Full structural audit, independent oversight, clear separation between fundraising spectacle and safety authority. He didn't couch it as suggestion. He presented it as necessity. "And accountability?" someone asked carefully. His gaze shifted briefly to the donor chairwoman. "That's not mine to assign," he said, "but it is required if this is going to mean anything." She met his look without flinching. "I take responsibility," she said, "for the approvals, for the pressure, for dismissing the warning signs." Several heads turned toward her, surprise rippling. She went on, voice steady. and for how I treated him. The room's attention swung back to him, waiting. He felt it, the weight of recognition, of validation arriving late but loud. He didn't savor it. "I don't need an apology on record," he said. "I need it to not happen again, to anyone." That, more than any accusation, shifted the room. The conversation moved forward differently after that. Solutions replaced defenses. Timelines formed. Commitments were made that couldn't easily be walked back. When the meeting adjourned, the donor chairwoman walked beside him toward the exit. "The board wants you as a consultant," she said. "Permanent role, with authority." He considered it as they reached the elevator. "I'll help with the review," he said. "Nothing more." She frowned slightly. "You'd turn that down?" "Yes. Why?" He glanced at his phone, where a reminder blinked softly. "School pickup." "Because my priority didn't change last night," he said. The elevator doors opened, revealing the lobby below. People looked up as they stepped inside, recognition sparking, whispers following. He ignored them, focused instead on the quiet hum of dissent. Outside, the city moved on, indifferent to boardrooms and galas alike. He walked to his car, the morning crisp against his skin, and drove across town to a small school with chipped paint and cheerful murals. His daughter waited by the gate, backpack nearly as big as she was. She spotted him and ran, arms flinging around his waist with the same certainty as always. "Did you fix the building again?" she asked. "I talked about it," he said. "A lot," she laughed. "That sounds boring," he smiled. "It is." As they drove home, his phone buzzed again. Headlines now. Articles naming him, dissecting his past, praising his actions. He didn't open them. Instead, he listened as his daughter talked about spelling tests and playground drama, the normalcy grounding him more than any accolade could. That afternoon, Elena called. "The charity's restructuring," she said. "Real changes. People are paying attention." "Good," he replied. "And the donor chairwoman," she added. "She's stepping back from public-facing leadership, staying on to fix what she broke." He paused. "That matters." As the call ended, he sat at the kitchen table, tools laid out neatly as he cleaned and checked them, a ritual that calmed his mind. Outside, the neighborhood hummed with ordinary life. Lawns being mowed, kids shouting, dogs barking. The gala would be remembered as a near disaster. He would be remembered as the man who prevented it. But in this quiet space with his daughter doing homework nearby, he was simply a father who'd gone to work and come home again. And that, in the end, was the victory that mattered most. The days that followed settled into an unfamiliar rhythm, one shaped by consequences rather than crisis. The headlines cooled from urgency to analysis, then to something closer to reflection. Articles stopped using words like miracle and hero, and started using phrases like systemic failure and accountability. He read none of it directly, but fragments reached him anyway, carried by neighbors, co-workers, and the occasional reporter waiting too close to the school gate. At work, nothing changed on the surface. Same uniform, same early mornings, same maintenance requests taped crookedly to the board. But people looked at him differently now. They paused when he spoke. They listened the first time. Respect had arrived quietly, without ceremony, and he accepted it the same way he accepted everything else, without letting it define him. One afternoon, Elena visited the maintenance office, stepping carefully around tool carts and coils of cable. "The charity board voted," she said. "Independent oversight. Permanent safety authority separate from donors." He nodded. "That's how it should have been. They also issued a public acknowledgement," she added. "About you, about what happened." He kept tightening a bolt, the steady turn grounding him. Acknowledgement doesn't keep buildings standing. No, she agreed, but it can change people. Across town, the donor chairwoman stood in front of a different kind of room. No cameras this time, just staff and partners who'd worked under her for years. She spoke without notes, naming her failures plainly, outlining changes she would oversee before stepping back. Some were stunned, others relieved. Authority didn't vanish from her that day, but it transformed into something harder, more restrained. Later that evening, she called him. Not through assistants, not through boards, directly. "I wanted you to hear it from me," she said. "I'm staying on until the review is complete. Then I'm gone." He listened without interrupting. "And after?" "I don't know," she admitted. "But I won't pretend I didn't learn something." "That's enough," he said. They ended the call without ceremony. No reconciliation scene. No dramatic closure. Just two people standing on opposite sides of a lesson that couldn't be unlearned. At home, his daughter spread her homework across the kitchen table, humming softly, and she paused and looked up at him. "Are people still talking about the night?" "Some," he said. "Did they say sorry?" He smiled faintly. "Some did, some didn't." She considered that, then shrugged. "You still did the right thing." "Yes," he said, "we did." That night, as he tucked her into bed, she asked the question she'd been holding on to. "Were you scared?" He thought about the crack in the floor, the weight overhead, the room full of people who hadn't listened until they had no choice. "I was focused," he said honestly. She nodded, satisfied. "That's better." When the lights were out and the house quiet, he sat alone for a moment, listening to the familiar sounds of home. Pipes settling, wind brushing the windows, ordinary noises that meant safety. Dignity restored didn't come from applause or boardrooms. It came from knowing that when power failed, responsibility didn't. The gala was already fading into memory for most people. For him, it remained a reminder, not of humiliation, but of clarity. And clarity, once earned, didn't leave. The story didn't end with headlines or board votes. It ended quietly, the way most real reckonings do in the spaces where no one was watching anymore. Weeks later, the hotel hosted its first event under new safety protocols, smaller and humbler, the exposed framework now a permanent reminder of what had nearly been ignored. He wasn't there. He didn't need to be. On an ordinary evening, he stood in the kitchen, stirring a pot while his daughter set the table, counting plates out loud like it was a game. The radio hummed softly in the background, a local station talking about traffic and weather. Nothing remarkable, and that was the point. "Did you know," she said suddenly, "my teacher talked about you?" He glanced over, surprised. "About me?" "About the night," she clarified. "She said sometimes grown-ups don't listen to the right people." He smiled to himself. "That's true." "She said courage isn't loud," the girl added, arranging forks carefully. "It's just doing the thing anyway." He felt that one land deeper than he expected. Sounds like a smart teacher. Dinner passed easily, laughter threading through small stories and spilled water and second helpings. Afterward, he washed dishes while she did homework, the rhythm of ordinary life stitching itself back together. Outside, the neighborhood glowed with porch lights and familiar sounds. No cameras, no applause, just continuity. Later, after she'd gone to bed, he sat alone at the table, phone resting face down beside him. It still buzzed sometimes. Requests, invitations, offers framed as opportunities. He answered a few when they mattered. Most he let pass. His world had narrowed in the best way, focused on what he could carry without dropping anything important. Across town, the donor chairwoman walked through the same hotel lobby she'd once ruled effortlessly. This time, she noticed the service corridors, the access points, the people who kept the place standing. Power hadn't left her life entirely, but it no longer blinded her. She nodded at a maintenance worker as she passed, a small gesture, but one she wouldn't have made before. The charity continued its work, quieter now, safer, more grounded. Jonah recovered fully. His parents sent a handwritten note that he kept tucked into a drawer with other things that mattered. Not trophies, proof. The world moved on, it always did, but something subtle had shifted. A social memory etched into the building, into the people who'd been there. They'd seen what happened when arrogance met reality. They'd felt the moment when dignity refused to stay invisible. On a weekend morning, he and his daughter walked to the park, sunlight filtering through the trees. She ran ahead, laughter ringing out, unburdened. He watched her go, heart steady, knowing he'd chosen correctly every step of the way. A passerby recognized him, hesitated, then offered a nod of quiet respect. He returned it without breaking stride. Recognition didn't weigh him down anymore. It simply passed through. Because the truth was simple. He'd been thrown out of a charity gala, yes, but the moment that mattered wasn't when he was expelled. It was when he came back, not for pride, not for revenge, but because people needed him, and he had the skill to help. That was the part worth remembering. Before we close this one out, I want to hear from you. Ask me for the next story title you want to see tackled. Subscribe and don't miss our next story. Single mother mocked at school meeting until the principal read the file. Trust me, you'll feel it. And tell me in the comments, what injustice should we tackle next?